to be here this morning. It's really, really a thrill. This is my first time in Cincinnati, besides being in the airport. I've been in your airport so many times, and I've never had a reason to actually come to Cincinnati. And so it's really exciting for me to be here. Oh, I got you on the slide. I picked this topic, and I probably should have stopped by strengthening resilience. I should have probably stopped there, but I didn't. I went on to that next step, and I added through interdisciplinary, multi-generational collaboration. And I did that very intentionally, because I truly believe for us to be resilient, either as individuals or as a community, such as Cincinnati, or even your school district or your building, that for us to be resilient, and even planetary resiliency, that we have to work together, and that we have to work across the generations. And I'm getting kind of old, and I realize that I've passed that mid-century mark, and it's kind of an interesting position to be in, to be able to look back on what you're doing. And what I see from my perspective is I see a lot of recycling of ideas. And in a way, it's a little disheartening to me to see the next generation working on the exact same ideas that I was so enthusiastic and I worked so hard on when I was younger, starting over and working on those ideas again. And I think this is something that if we can stop that from happening, instead of starting over and reworking ideas, if we can build on those ideas and move forward, I think it would be such a better thing for society. And I look at examples like sustainable development. The term sustainable development was actually coined in 1983, so almost 40 years ago. And it came out of a UN commission in 1983 where they created that whole concept that you guys hear about from a sustainability perspective. You hear about the economy, social, environmental, people, profit, planet. So that was 40 years ago. And we're still having discussions about what does that really mean to our society. The USGBC and their strategy took another step. They added another pillar to their strategic directive in terms of sustainability. And they now talk about sustainability, and they talk about resiliency, and they talk about health and wellness and equity. So they really defined what that social pillar is, and they defined it to mean health and wellness and equity. And so you see this sort of change over time of these ideas as we just kind of work our way around the circle and coming up with those ideas. But I really think for us to be successful, we need to stop going in that circle and sort of go up the chain. I heard a new term recently. It was called Jedi. And I don't know, has anybody heard the term Jedi? You probably see somebody raise their hand. Jedi is justice, it's equity, it's diversity and inclusion. And so it's just a new shiny way of talking about issues that we've been talking about. When I first started my career, we used to do environmental justice. I would work on projects, and anytime we did a federal project as part of NEPA, I was required to do an environmental justice report, making sure that the projects that we were building, that we were being equitable in terms of where we were positioning and where we were locating them in the community. And even the term circular economy, I hear it all the time. People are always talking about circular economy. It's got so much energy. People are excited about circular economy, but it's a lot of the same ideas that we talked about. When I was in school, we talked about industrial ecology. And we talked about how manufacturers and industry were just big systems. And in order to operate those industrial complexes, we need to operate them like they were natural systems. That you generate waste, and you position your manufacturing or industry so that one company generates waste and the other is able to use the waste, or one generates steam and they're able to use the steam for energy in the plant. And so over time, those ideas sort of fade away, and people aren't talking about industrial symbiosis or industrial ecology. They're talking about that next new shiny thing. When I first started to work, I was maybe 23 years old, I went to this leadership development class that my company offered. It was all about empathy, and I had never heard about empathy, let alone how to be empathetic. And I was so jazzed when I got back from this half-day workshop that my company let me go to. I went to my supervisor and said, "You need to go to this class, it's amazing." I was just so pumped and excited. And he looked up at me, and he was probably about my age at the time, and he said, "Amy, it's the same old thing, they're just recycling it." And I thought, what a curmudgeon you are. people, and I asked, I said, how many students are in the room? I went through that whole thing. There were a lot of students that were in my session. And I showed them this model, I showed them this kind of software program. I said, how many people know about this? And there was not one single person in the room that had ever heard of this software package that would help you with predicting the carbon footprint from products. And I sadly remember 19 years ago when they launched the software program that was available, and not one single person in that room heard of it. And then I said, how many people showed another thing, a new exciting tool that's available called Building Transparency, and the EC3 tool, which is a carbon tool to help you understand the carbon impacts of building products. And like half the room raised their hand. They all heard of this new exciting tool. Yet the same tool that did almost the same thing had kind of been abandoned, and they started with a new tool. And I just feel like for us to be successful, for us to really truly be sustainable as a society, that if we somehow find that way to work together and build on the accomplishments of other people, that we would really be more successful. So I actually had a question, and this may or may not go off well, but I wanted to ask you, just show of hands, how many people have ever had an amazing idea at work? Has anybody ever had an amazing idea? Raise your hand. I always think my ideas are amazing, so I always say, don't be shy. Have you ever had an amazing idea at work? Keep them up, keep them up. This is a person, come on, it'll be fun. This morning, we got to energize. Okay, how many people went to their supervisor and said, and told them about this idea, and they said, you are a genius. This is the best idea we've ever had. You go out, and I'm going to, you go out and you do it. Everybody keep your hands up. Do people do that? No, nobody? What? Okay, I have a couple people. But maybe raise your hand if you've ever heard this. How many people have ever heard, we've tried that idea and it didn't work? Has anybody ever heard, we've tried that, oh my gosh, I got more hands up, we've tried that idea and it didn't work? I caught myself the other day saying that, and as soon as it came out of my mouth, I had this flashback to when I was young and enthusiastic and I had these great ideas. And I saw the look on this employee's face, and it was a new and bubbly, new associate, and I mean, crestfallen. And I was so busy, and I was working on something, and I probably should have had my door shut, and I had my door open, and she came in and pitched this idea, and I'm like, oh, we've tried, that doesn't work. And I just like, crestfallen. And so then I'm like, no, come back. And I said, we've tried this idea, and it didn't work, and let me tell you why. We didn't have the technology to do it, okay? We didn't have the technology. So-and-so is the team lead, go talk to so-and-so, and we can give you the entire report. We spent years working on this idea, and it didn't work because we didn't have the technology. I said, but maybe if the technology is now available, so it was 6 years ago we worked on this, if it's available, you come back to me, and if you have a new angle, we can talk about it and discuss it. But as I'm thinking about my career, so many times people just said, we've done that, and it doesn't work. And then I sit here and think, well, no wonder people are starting over because we aren't sharing that information with each other. So I'm going to raise your hand one more time. How many people are sitting at a table with people they don't know? They've never met today. It's the first time you've never seen these. Oh my gosh, this is awesome. This is like opportunity waiting to happen, folks. This is opportunity. Because I think there's so much value in a conference like this. You come, and there's value, sure. You're going to get your 6 CEU credits or your AIA credits or whatever you need. But there's so much value to me in coming to a conference like this and talking with each other. And that's where I get my super cool ideas. Sure, the speakers are going to be great, but you're going to get some super cool ideas. So I encourage you to talk to each other. And I actually put that in my deck. I actually put talk to somebody that you don't normally talk to. When I was young and I would come to a conference like this, I would immediately gravitate to all the other young people that look like me, and I'd talk with them. Or maybe I'd talk with the other women, and I felt comfortable. And I know there are people in this room that would have scared me, and I probably wouldn't have gone up and said a word to you in this room. I'll be quite honest, maybe I wasn't self-confident enough when I was younger. But I challenge you today, walk up and talk to somebody that you have never spoken to or that you don't know, and just have that conversation and see where there are synergies and how you can make that connection. Because I think there's so much value that comes from those types of interactions. And you can tell them, hey, that lady at breakfast, that crazy lady, she told me I should introduce myself to somebody. So it gives you an excuse for you to even to go and talk to those people. So I wanted to talk about resilience. my slide purpose, I use the Oxford Dictionary definition for resiliency. And resiliency is the act of rebounding or springing back. I work for a flooring company, and we are resilient floor covering manufacturer. What that means is if you put a load on our floor, it will, and you take it off. So you have a washing machine, take it off, it will spring back. So that's what resiliency actually means. There are much more fancy definitions, much longer definitions for resiliency. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change really defines resiliency in order to be able to bounce back from a social, economic, and environmental perspective. While learning from that experience, it's a very long definition, which is why I didn't put it out. While learning from that experience and being able to create adaptations and learning and being able to transform yourself from that experience. But in my mind, there's really sort of two responses that you can have from a resiliency perspective. You can either be reactive or you can be proactive. And with proactive, it's the idea of planning, knowing that something is coming and being prepared for it when it happens. And I included on the slide, I included on the proactive side, sort of planning for it, I included two buildings. I included the Costello building, which is in Georgia. It's at the Institute of Georgia. And the Costello building is the first building to be certified as a Living Product Challenge building in Georgia. At the time, it was the first to be certified in the Southeast altogether. And they bill it as being a restorative building. It actually generates more electricity. You can see the big solar array that they put on top of that building. It generates more electricity, put more electricity back on the grid than it actually takes for the building. And it's a school building, it's a campus building, and it kind of makes sense that you put that array and generate enough electricity to run that building. The array also provides shading, which helps with cooling. That's not a solution we can use for all buildings. I know in my manufacturing plants, they're just so intensive in terms of the energy we use that we can't build enough solar panels on our manufacturing facility to offset our energy. But another example is the Hudson Passive House, which is in New York. And the Hudson Passive House is a prototype. So it's not really something we're doing, but it's a prototype of how to build a residential house. And you can look at that and you see those really big, thick walls that they have developed. And it's one of the most energy efficient homes, residential homes, that has ever been built. And so there's all this really cool proactive stuff that's going on. We have the knowledge, it's just we haven't taken that to the next level. We haven't scaled that up so that we're really going to be, at least in my opinion, to stem off climate change and the effects of climate change with what we're doing. And so if we can't do that, then we're going to be in that reactive mode. We're going to be in that mode where we have to adapt to that event that's going to happen and that we see happening all the time. And I put a quote on here by Charles Darwin. My undergraduate degree is actually in ecology, so I'm kind of a dweeb in that regard. But I really like these rabbits, and I know you're thinking rabbits, what do they have to do with building? But I put these rabbits on here because this is like the one thing that I remember from that college, that freshman ecology course that I took. The rabbit on the left-hand side, even if you don't know, does anybody know what kind of rabbit that is? It's a dead giveaway when you look at that rabbit because he has really big ears. And whenever you see an animal that has really big ears like that rabbit, and it's not just rabbits, mice do the same way, he has super giant ears because he is a desert hare, okay? He is a desert rabbit. And he's got these big ears because he needs the surface area to release the heat from his body so he can live in the desert. And that is an adaptation that animals that live in the desert actually have. They typically have these really big ears to let the heat come out. Now his buddy over on the other side, that white rabbit, he's an Arctic hare. And you notice his ears are really tiny, okay? And that, again, is an adaptation that he has taken so that he can survive in the Arctic. He has these little ears because he doesn't want to release heat from his body. And so I put the rabbits in here while we're not really talking about animals, but because there's different designs that we have to take, or different steps that we have to take depending on the geography where we're designing buildings. And it's very important that we understand nor the most intelligent, but the most responsive to change. And I think that to me, the most responsive to change is what's going to enable us to survive. I think that's pretty amazing. Because we have a lot of things that we're starting to see that we need to be surviving. The ice storms in Oklahoma, the first time we'd ever had freezing in Texas and Oklahoma. My company in Oklahoma, we actually were closed. We have a manufacturing unit there. We were closed for several weeks because of the effects of this ice storm. It was something we really didn't think. I mean, we have plants that, are along the coastline, and we actually, could date climate change there, but not in Oklahoma. So it's changing the way we're thinking about what we're doing. The fires in California, 60 days extension on the fire season now in California on average. It's lasting longer. The flash flooding in Tennessee that we had earlier. And when I look at that picture, I mean, you see destruction, but I also see all the carbon that went into those cars and that manufactured house and everything that's there. Huge carbon impact, huge greenhouse gas impact, and probably all that's going to go to a landfill, and we're going to build more. We're going to pump out more carbon to make more cars and more buildings. So I was thinking about my life and opportunities that I've had to be part of teams that have been proactive or reactive. And I thought about the first time I was ever being really proactive and practicing resiliency from a proactive perspective. And that was for Y2K. And I had this chart on my computer screen. My daughter's 14. And she's like, "What's that, Mom?" And I realized, oh my gosh, I'm really getting old. So I probably should explain Y2K is the year to 2000. And so there was all this thought that the world was almost going to come to a grinding halt on January 1st, 2000. And I worked at the Virginia Department of Transportation at that time. And in 1998, so it was 2 years before Y2K, we set up a committee to plan for what was going to happen on January 1st. And we got together on a very regular cadence. We went through every single asset that the Department of Transportation owned by division. It's a cross-functional team by division, and we identified every single computer piece of equipment, computer software, computer chips, anything like that that could potentially be impacted. And you may think, well, why would the Department of Transportation spend this much time on Y2K? But we had a lot of safety issues. Traffic lights, we have the HOV lanes when they close and open, they're all done by computer in terms of doing that. The Bay Bridge Tunnel, all those types of infrastructure, there was a huge safety. If the high occupancy vehicle lanes in Northern Virginia open and the traffic headed in the wrong direction, we could have a serious problem. And so we went through that, we strategized, we prioritized, and we came up with a plan to respond. We called all the people that supplied that equipment. We found out, have you updated your software? What do we need to do? And we went through this whole checklist. And I was literally at work on December 31st, 1999 at 11 o'clock, wearing my Y2K shirt. The whole team was there. And we had this whole procedure that we went through to verify that nothing was going to happen. And nothing happened. And it was like the biggest nothing. And I thought I spent the last year and a half of this and nothing happened. And I'm not sure it's because we did such a good job, in planning, and we did change out a lot of software, we did a lot of work, but, it's just that idea of addressing the problem before something happened, because if it happened, it could have been a pretty big deal. I think COVID, the pandemic, what we've all been through, is a really good example of being reactive resilience. And we would have never had a vaccine if it had not been for Jonas Salk. We developed that vaccine in 11 months. Because of the work of other people, because of the work of the generations that went before us, and really that ability to share that information. Does anybody know who the guy, I put that picture up there of the guy on the right-hand side. Does anybody know who that is? Anybody remember this guy? We saw him a lot early in the pandemic. His name is Peter Tsai, and Peter Tsai is the inventor of the N95 mask. And we brought Peter back out. I think he worked at the University of Tennessee, but he invented the N95 mask. And they brought him out of retirement, and he was like on every news station early on, telling people how to make masks. People wearing bandanas, and he's like, no, bandanas won't work. You need to have cross-functional fabrics. And he was giving this great explanation of how the masks worked. And it was interesting because he already had that knowledge. We didn't have to go. Virginia Tech, about 4 months later, came out with a study that kind of confirmed everything that he said in the interview that I saw with him. companies like Ford jumped in. And I had no idea that Ford, I've never even thought about Ford as being able to have the capability of being able to sew and to manufacture things. But I mean, I guess it makes sense. You know, my car seats didn't put themselves together. So really looking at the how different disciplines have opportunities. They're working on some of the same issues. You get in your bubble and you think about what you're doing, and you don't think about this other kind of contingencies or fringes and how it relates. I really like this study. This was actually a study. This is an invention that came out of the University of Connecticut. And the three guys on the right are the inventors of this ventilator. And they were challenged, I'm sure it was probably a school project, to create a ventilator back when there were lots of shortages of ventilators. And the one guy remembered from being a kid, he remembered seeing them smoke bees. I should have asked you what that is, but that's a bee smoker, in case you didn't know. The first picture on there is a bee smoker. And it has that bellow, on there that opens and closes to push the smoke out. And he remembers seeing those as a kid. And he couldn't get medical devices. You couldn't get those. But there were tons of bee smokers available during the pandemic. There was not a run on the supply chain for bee smokers. And so what they did is they actually made respirators from bee smokers. They took the smoker part, they took the bellow off, they put two bellows together, and then they put a total of 4 bellows, and they were able to make respirators and provide them to the hospital that worked. And so it's looking at a problem or an issue, but really borrowing from another industry on how you can proceed. And so I wanted to say to you, because when I looked at the agenda for this workshop, I immediately gravitated to that embodied carbon series that's going on, and I'm going to be there. And then I thought to myself, well, you can always go to the embodied carbon workshop, because I like to hear how other people, it's something I talk about a lot, and I like to hear how other people talk about it. But I wanted to challenge you again. So this is my second challenge to you today. I want you to maybe think about going to something you wouldn't normally go to. It might blow your mind what's happening just one door over from where you are. Instead of learning about something you already know and you're already an expert and sitting there critiquing how that guy defined embodied carbon versus how you do it, try something new and see if you can find that opportunity to connect. A few years ago, I was doing a presentation in California, and I was right before lunch, so I was late getting to lunch, and they had a big outdoor buffet. And I got my lunch, I got my plate, and there wasn't really any place to sit. So I'm looking for a place to sit, and I was looking for, and I sat with this table, it was kind of the back, and there was about 7 young people there. And they were all students at the University of California in Berkeley. And I'm thinking, my gosh, you came, it was in Phoenix, so they came from California to Phoenix for this workshop. They're all sitting at the same table together. And it was a conference of like sustainability leaders for all the big Fortune 500 companies. So there was some brain power sitting at those tables. And all these students are sitting right there next to each other, having the same conversation they probably had back at the cafeteria at the University of California. And just for kicks, I was trying to talk to them, and they were looking like, why is this old woman sitting at her table? And I could just tell that they were a little uncomfortable that a woman sat down at their table, being older. And so I asked the young gentleman that was sitting beside the college student, and he was like an engineering architectural student. I said, so what research are you working on? What's the new research? And he told me that he was working on a model to model the emissions from vehicles that would be traveling to the buildings, different building types that they were building. And he went on and on about this. And I said, oh, that's just awesome. That's great. I said, so are you working with Caltrans? And Caltrans is the California Department of Transportation. And he looked at me and he said, why the heck would I be working with Caltrans? And I was taken aback by this. And I said, because they're probably the leading experts on modeling emissions from vehicles in the state of California, if not in the country. And he looked at me and he's like, what do you mean? And he had no idea that, I said, Caltrans has an entire department that models air quality. I said, it's a federal requirement. or, I didn't think I was rude, but you know, there's those opportunities. You don't know what you don't know. So when we're talking about resiliency, resiliency provides us really protection. It protects us, but it also provides us with opportunities. So with COVID, it has given us the opportunity to really examine indoor air quality, how we build our spaces. Can we make spaces, better? Climate change is giving us that opportunity to look at decarbonization. How can we reduce our carbon footprint? And the same with natural disasters. I mean, how are we using our resources? How can we build better spaces that are safer? And I would actually go so far as to say that we can look back on things that have already happened. Look at nature and really leverage what nature has to offer to us in order to be able to build resilience into what we're doing. I think so often we think we're looking for that next shiny idea. I know where I work, I always talk about innovation, what's the new innovation? And sometimes I think instead of looking for that new innovation, just looking at the things that have come before us are really a good idea. And I think there's ways to leverage nature. I show a picture here, it's kind of a rain garden, and I started seeing these pop up. I know where I live in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, all throughout our downtown area, you're starting to see these rain gardens. And the idea behind these gardens is instead of your stormwater going into, in Lancaster we have a combined sewer stormwater. So whenever we have big storms, our sewer actually overflows into our local water body, which is not good. And so what they've done as a strategy is they've taken all of these little areas throughout the town and they have allowed openings for the water to come into this rainwater to hold that storm water so it doesn't overflow our combined stormwater sewage situation. And it's been really effective. Also, in the top picture of one of our manufacturing plants. It's in Australia. Australia is has a lot of issues with water scarcity. It's kind of challenging. And so we actually collect the rainwater on the roof of our plant. We've been doing that since 2008. When we put that system in place, it cut the amount of potable water we were using by 40%. And we use that water in the gray systems within our plant. But this is nothing new. I mean, the Romans, have been using, this is a cistern from Roman, like 100 AD. They've been collecting water for years. When I moved to Lancaster, Pennsylvania, I told the realtor that I wanted a farmhouse. I always had this dream of looking at an old farmhouse. And so he took me to this farmhouse, and I have never forgotten this farmhouse. It was like something out of a horror movie. In the basement of this farmhouse, the entire basement was a cistern. It was over 100 years old. And you went down the stairs, and it had kind of an old wooden cover, but part of it was exposed. And there was this huge there was a huge cistern that had been built under the house. The whole house was built on a cistern. It was the most eeriest thing, and no one had lived there in a long time. It was moldy. It wasn't exactly ideal. But people have been collecting and using rainwater for a long time. This is the University of Kentucky. They just started collecting rainwater. They use it for their irrigation systems. Dockside Green in Victoria, British Columbia, they're also collecting rainwater from their development, as well as storage. They're starting to do on-site treatment of storage and then using that for irrigation, using it in those graywater streams. When I first started working back in the early 90s, I remember a gentleman from NASA came and he talked to my group, and his presentation was all about how NASA, I remember thinking at the time it was kind of odd, like how in NASA, what do you do with the waste when you're on the space station? And so all of his work had to do with how do you treat water from a space situation. And I thought it was so out there and crazy. And we're starting to see people actually do that. But it took 30 years for that. He'd probably been working on it for another 20 years for us to move that concept and that idea forward. Rainwater actually has a carbon footprint. I always think people don't think about water as having a carbon footprint, but to treat that water, to pump that water, it has a carbon footprint. And this is just one estimate that it takes about 521 million megawatt hours is how much energy we use for electrical consumption. And that's like, what does that really mean? I gave a talk earlier this week talking about carbon footprint of electricity, because I can't really wrap my head around that. And I was looking at the different electric companies. And so each electric company reports how many pounds of CO2 they emit per megawatt hour of electricity generated. And it's a range. It really depends on the grid. It depends on where you're located. But it's anywhere from right about our rainwater can save us, 106 to 220 tons of greenhouse gases just by using rainwater. So there are these little ideas that I think can have a really, really big impact. And I was trying to find a number. It's really hard to find like potable water numbers. And then I realized that the EPA, they have a new calculator out that will actually calculate the carbon footprint for water. So I hadn't even heard about it. I think some of the times our federal government has these really sharp, cerebral people working on these ideas, and sometimes they don't always market those ideas. So when you think about daylight, just another example, kind of like water. I mean, daylight can save energy, can be disinfectant, can be a mood enhancer. My niece was over at my mother's house. I was hanging my clothes outside. I know it's probably like silly, but she had never seen anybody hang clothes outside. And she said to me, my niece, she said, Aunt Amy, what are you doing? Why are you at Grandma's clothes hanging outside on the porch? And I'm like, sweetie, I'm drying them. I said, doesn't your mother hang clothes out? And she said, no, we have a dryer. And I thought, it's interesting to me how generations change. And we still use a lot of energy for lighting. We still use a lot of energy for heating. This is just a breakdown by the Livermore Berkeley Lab showing the breakdown of electricity and the consumption that we use. But we have a lot of ideas. This is a picture of a plant that Armstrong had in Southgate. And our plant was built back in the 30s. And it's a little old, but it actually has this sawtooth roof. And sawtooth roofs were very popular, going back even into the 1800s as part of the industrial revolution. And it allowed that light to come into that factory. And it was before we had electricity. You actually had to do this because we didn't have electric light. But it allowed the light to come into the factory floor. You also had that diurnal cooling effect from having the ventilation at the top and being able to let the heat out from the building. So it had a lot of really positive impacts on the building. And I thought this was funny because when I was looking up the history of sawtooth roofs because I wanted to be prepared today. And this is a book that described why and how we should build sawtooth roofs, and it was dated from 1865. So sometimes you can get awesome information on the internet. The same with daylighting. It's not new. This is the Parthenon, that's the Oculus in the Parthenon in Rome. It was built in 1825 AD. It was designed to let light come into the building. And we're doing that. I mean, the picture in the middle is a picture from the Ministry of Defense in the UK. The building was built so that the center of the building, they actually put glass in the center, and then the sides of the building so that everybody in that building wasn't on a narrow footprint. And so this way they can bring light into all of the occupants of the building. And then I took a picture of my own office because we just have a new office. And we basically took an old building, which we retrofitted. We took it down to the core shell, and we redid it, and we put these huge windows, these triple pane windows into the space, really to bring that daylight, so everybody has access to that light. And they actually don't need electric lights unless you're in there at night, which I haven't been at the office. I haven't been there at night yet. Maybe in the fall it gets dark early. And I like this picture, I like the color, but again, the light coming into the classroom, it can bounce off the floor, and they have the windows over on the right-hand side up at the top. So that not only is the wall, you go into the hallway and really push that light just a little bit further through that space. And daylight has the benefit of really having health benefits for people. And I think it's pretty amazing when you start reading the research on daylight. I mean, it's all part of the whole biophilic design, bringing that daylight in. My daughter had to get glasses, and I just thought, I wear glasses, it's hereditary, I got bad eyesight in the family. But I took her to get her glasses, and I was a little put off by the optometrist that examined her eyes. He said to me, you need to get her off the iPad. She's spending too much time inside. And I thought, who are you to tell me that my daughter's studying? You don't even know me. And he said to me, he said, one of the causes of myopia, which is nearsightedness, is lack of daylight, lack of sunlight in children. And I thought, this guy's full of hooey. I've never heard that. So of course I didn't say anything, and I said, oh really, thank you. And I came home and I researched it. There are so many articles in medical journals on how lack of sunlight causes myopia in children. It's unbelievable. And they even had a study, and I was a little disturbed by it, but they had a study, it was done in China. And so they kept kids inside intentionally
so they couldn't be exposed to daylight. And then they had other kids, so they actually took theirs, it was in a school, they did it in a school, and they actually showed statistically that the kids that they restricted from going outside actually developed myopia. So it was more than just that one study, there was lots of studies out there. Other things with daylight is older people. I'm getting older. My mother, who's almost 90, is still alive, has a little bit of dementia. And there's lots of research showing that people who have dementia, that being exposed to that natural daylight helps set their circadian rhythms and helps them with what they call sundowning. So that when you have dementia patients, sometimes they get really crazy around 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and it really helps with patient behavior with dementia. So they're still learning on how sunlight impacts and affects our body. Shade, obvious, if you have shade on buildings, you're able to displace cooling. You don't have to cool by 20 to 40%. And I just put some examples. This is McDonald's and Disney World. I was actually in Chicago earlier this week, and my hotel room looked out over the sustainable McDonald's in Chicago, which is kind of similar. I thought, why didn't I take pictures of that? But I didn't. But this is in Disney World. They've got the solar array. They're really taking advantage of the solar array, using it to cool that space. Mohawk College, it's the largest net zero building in Canada. Very similar. They have the solar array, really taking advantage of the shade. Well, we can just get old school. Let's plant trees around your building. This building is actually near my house. It's at Franklin Marshall College, which is in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. It's their new visual art center. It is quite the building. It's a very traditional college, so it kind of stands out, really, in my opinion, because it's a very distinctive architecture. But the way they built it, they didn't cut any trees. They just sort of inserted the building into these 100-year-old trees that are already there, so that the building is actually shaded by trees. And then ventilation is very trendy. You see a lot of places they have these garage doors that roll up, and you can open and let nature into your space. Windows that open. My windows where I stayed last night did not open. In Chicago, my windows actually opened. I was really surprised in my hotel room that I could actually open. And I was like on the 9th floor looking out, and I could actually open them pretty far in the room. And the picture in the middle is actually my house. And I put this in here because my house has something I think is phenomenal, and I can't explain it about my house. My house was built in 1927, so it's an older house. And these two French doors go out to a screened-in porch. And what I found in my house is I open these, and they'll open all the way, they fold back into the room, they'll open all the way. And then I have another porch on the other side. I open those porch doors. And then I have a weird door upstairs, and there's a cantilever porch upstairs that's like 3 feet by 3 feet. It's just enough to allow me to open the door. You can't really do anything out there. You can't put a chair, because you can't open the door if you set a chair out there. And if I open that door, there's something secret about how it draws the ventilation into the house. It didn't have that air conditioning originally. It creates, and not on a windy day, on just any day, guaranteed, if I open these 3 doors, the amount of ventilation coming through that building, or through my house, it's like a wind stream through that house. And it just naturally, the air just sweeps through the building. And I'm sure there's somebody that can explain to me why that happens. I'm sure it's very scientific. It drives my cat crazy when I do this. He runs like a wild cat all over the room. And it's awesome because you have all this fresh air that's just blowing into the space. So there's a lot that we can do with natural ventilation. I included this just because of a nod to my days working in transportation. And I used to push traffic circles. Okay, I was a public employee, but I still would push with all the localities. You need traffic circles, and I can get you traffic circles. And there's actually money. I could have paid for their darn traffic circles because I would get money at the time from the federal government to build traffic circles because they actually reduce congestion. They get the cars moving. So when cars don't have to come to a stop at traffic circles. And when cars are stopped, when they're idle, that's when they release the most emissions. There's like an optimal speed for the gas engine around 40, 42 miles an hour. So if you keep the cars moving at that speed limit, you can really reduce your emissions from transportation. And so I used to push doing this. This is DuPont Circle. This was built in 1865. They built this. Of course, it didn't have electric traffic lights, so they kind of needed a different solution. But it's still there, and it's pretty cool. But where I live in Pennsylvania, I'm starting to see traffic circles popping up everywhere. And I think finally people are realizing the benefit of having traffic circles. You don't have to have traffic lights. Less maintenance for our departments of transportation. And it has all those added benefits of reducing congestion and improving air quality. And so, in kind of closing, I would encourage you to think about resiliency and to actually have a resiliency plan. So rather you're working with a city, or maybe you're working on a specific building, or you're working for a client, really think about where your vulnerabilities are. You know, what are the consequences of that natural disaster, of that event that could happen? Really discover and understand that. And then prioritize. How does that impact equity? How does that impact the sustainability of your building, of your area? And then look from a solution. You know, what are those solutions? Mike mentioned our speaker, our last speaker today, Craig Stevenson. He's going to be talking about redesigning buildings and how it's so important just to start with the buildings that we already have and rework them instead of starting new and building new construction. So we're going to have that opportunity. And then how do you really respond in terms of what you're doing, and how do you execute on that? And then how do you control and adapt? So if that big event, that next big crazy storm system happens, what are you going to do? How are you going to respond? Because you might say, oh, those poor people in Tennessee, or those poor people in California. It could be Cincinnati. It could be your area. It could be your manufacturing plant, or it could be your building where you're having those problems. And it's really positive to proactively kind of think through all of that. And so, in closing, I would like to encourage you to learn from the past, plan for the future, and enjoy the present, enjoy the Rebuild Conference today. And I really want to encourage you, again, interact outside of your sphere, outside your comfort zone. Meet some new people today, and maybe try some new sessions, try some things that